It's great to have a full house at the library's Adair Auditorium and to have many people with us virtually. A very warm welcome on behalf of the Atwater Library. I'm Lynn Verge, Executive Director. In the room are several members of our Board of Directors. We have 9 wonderful volunteers leading the organization on our board. A special welcome to members of the Westmount City Council. We are tremendously grateful for your presence in person and by Zoom. And now I see joining us Phyllis Lambert. Thank you very much, Phyllis and everyone. Your presence shows your deep concern for the development that will take place in the vicinity of this beautiful heritage building that serves as a vibrant community center. Our public discussion will begin with presentations by a panel of experts led by Julia Gersovitz. Julia Gersovitz, as most of you realize, is an eminent architect whose conservation work has earned her honors and awards. In 2018, she was inducted by the Governor General as an Officer of the Order of Canada. Last year, the Quebec Ordre des Architectes gave her a Médaille de Mérite. Julia is a professor of practice at McGill's School of Architecture, and she's also an associate professor at UDM. For over 30 years, she served on design review committees for Quebec, Montreal, and Westmount, and for the city of Westmount for many years, chaired the Planning Advisory Committee. Julia Gersovitz will lead the panel discussion and introduce the other members of the panel. I trust that everyone in the audience has short biographies of the panelists. If you don't, it's available at the back of the room. Over to you, Julia.
Thank you. I didn't realize I was going to introduce everyone else, but luckily I've known everyone for years, and I would like to say that they're friends. I would like to say to you that what you're going to see tonight is the bones of a discussion that Phyllis Lambert, Bob Cohen, and I took to the City Council to show to the Mayor and Council, and it was from that we have begun to enlarge our discussion to include Professor Annmarie Adams and Professor Nick Luka. So I will, you all have our biographies, and probably everybody hates hearing their own biography as much as I hate hearing mine. So I will just say that Annmarie Adams is trained as an architect and then went on to her doctorate in architectural history, and is joint professor in McGill in the School of Architecture and in the Faculty of Medicine. Nick Luka is a professor of urban planning at McGill as well, so you have 3 McGill professors here. And Robert Cohen is a lawyer who has spent much of his career pioneering affordable housing. It was Robert Cohen with Phyllis Lambert and others who created the Milton Park housing project that survives today and is really a beacon of how affordable housing can work in this country. Bob has taken that expertise and taken it across the world. And so we have brought together, we hope, expertise in conservation, in architecture, in architectural history, in being neighbors, and in in urban planning and in affordable housing. So we should be able to both start off with some presentation, and then we hope have quite a lively discussion. Okay? So we're going to, it's going to be a bit of a ballet. Okay. A ballet with music, and that's the introduction, and that's where we're going from now on. So the only thing that isn't here, Lynn, is the presentation.
Oh, so our IT manager is about to start the slideshow with you, Julia, and
good.
then you'll be able to activate the slides using
Perfect.
the laptop.
Great, thank you. Perfect. Thank you very much. So as I said, this began as a discussion that we brought to Council and to City Hall. As I said, it was Phyllis Lambert, Bob Cohen, and I who went, and so you're going to be seeing the presentation enlarged from what we first brought to City Hall. But we thought we would start with a slide that goes... Oh.
It's here. No, it's ready.
Okay. How did we get here? And this is the slide that we'd like to explain to you. In 1960, the city of Westmount hired some very fine town planners. John Bland was the head of the firm, Bland, Lemoyne, Edwards. And they set about modernizing this sector. And it was through their report, which is available if you're interested in it, that this area was first subject to what was becoming very popular in the United States, this idea of wholesale demolition. So they demolished much of this area from Dorchester, the north side of Dorchester, to St. Catherine Street, and then they are expecting to build a whole lot of high-rise buildings. And they were thwarted by citizens such as Mark London and Joe Baker, who happened to be living in the area that was going to be demolished, and they were quite rightly rather peeved. So fast forward now 65 years, and we've got the same idea of consultants being hired by the city of Westmount, in this case LeMay and Associates, and they have again come up with a plan to build high-rises. And we are going to talk to you tonight about why we don't think this is the right direction and give you some alternatives. And we hope ways forward which will engage you all as part of the decision makers. For a long time in this discussion, which has been going on at least for the last 6 months at a very heavy pace, the focus has been on St. Catherine Street, and we're going to suggest to you that the success of this project will not lie necessarily just in St. Catherine Street, but in how the whole sector is treated. And we could not find really any guiding principles for the sector, so we have put together a number of them which we consider are important, and you will see, we hope, why by the end of our presentation. We believe it's important to reknit the urban fabric, and Annmarie will be discussing that. Planning for families, affordability, livability, and the introduction of greenery in the way that Phyllis has discussed of bringing the mountain back down into this area. So Annmarie is going to start talking as a resident and as an architect and architectural historian, excuse me. I will turn off my mic.
Okay, that's working? Right. Okay, thanks, Julia. Thanks for the invitation. It's great to be here. I bring, I think, 2 categories of experience to the table for this discussion. Firstly, as was mentioned, 35 years as an architectural educator, including leadership roles at the School of Architecture at McGill. And secondly, and maybe more importantly, is that I live just below the sector that will be most affected by the proposal, so I wanted to speak to that. I live at 100 Columbia with my husband, who's right there in the front row, and now and then our 2 grown-up children and 2 dogs in the heart of what is sometimes called at the Westmount dog run, SODO. So we have lived there for 7 years, and before that I've lived since 1992 on Grosvenor, Elm, and Melville Streets in apartments, row houses, and a duplex rented and owned. I've just live in just about every way you can in Westmount. And although, as Joya mentioned, trained as an architect, I'm really an architectural historian. And as such, I offer you this description of our beautiful SoDo area. It is mostly 2 to 3 story brick and stone Victorian houses. Many of them are attached to neighbors. These houses have picturesque silhouettes with highly pitched roofs, period decoration, delightfully variable windows and entrances, small front gardens, a rich and underappreciated alley life marked by old and new fences at a range of angles. Parking, as we all know, is rather ad hoc and adds to the culture of alley life in the area. And let's say parking is very creative. For example, my street, Columbia, only has 1 driveway. So here and there in SoDo are 6 to 8 story apartment buildings. It's also mixed use, as you can see on the slides, with large institutional buildings. For example, the Brutalist RCMP building and its distant cousin across the street, which was originally designed for nurses and now seems to be for dermatologists. Okay, next slide. The most important characteristic of this sector, however, is that SoDo is defined in the south by a very hard, impenetrable edge, the tracks, and the Ville-Marie Expressway. That's my own slide of that on the right. Delivery trucks and Uber drivers and many others know not to turn down our streets because of the difficulty of turning around. The Canada Post truck, I've noticed, parks at the top and works the streets by foot. So when we bought our house in 2018, we saw this hard edge on the south as a bonus, appreciating how it makes the streets safe for kids and pedestrians, how nobody wants to drive on our streets. And nonetheless, it is a very hard edge. At the Westmount Athletics grounds dog run, for example, when you lose a ball over the fence, as we often do, it's gone forever. And here is why that matters. Building a wall of 30-story towers on Dorchester, as proposed in the LeMay plan, will mean that the homes in SoDo will be effectively blocked in like a row of books on a library shelf. They'll be cut off from the street life of St. Catherine and Green with a second northerly barrier, kind of like living in a walled or gated community like this, without the benefits. So although the current situation of vacant lots and parking lots along Dorchester is not ideal, and you see that in the plan in the yellow shape, at least SoDo and what might be called NoDo are now connected. They are permeable. They are gently linked. So on my daily walk to Atwater to catch the bus to work, for example, I have a number of path options. I can see where I'm going, and I feel safe. Building low-rise, affordable housing on these sites and to invoke the visionary urban planner, Jane Jacobs, will make it even safer. It will give us what she called eyes on the street on Dorchester, so that everybody is and feels safe when walking. And I think this is especially important for young people going to Westmount High or Saunter Green, or anybody entering Westmount from the direction of Atwater. Towers along Dorchester, on the other hand, will make our area something of a canyon. So one strategy to connect or reconnect or reknit SoDo to the slice of underused land would be to design a project with a pattern of alleys like we already have below Dorchester. This could be a sensitive connection linking the streets below to the commercial streets and offer a choice of paths and sight lines with blocks of affordable housing. My photos show how 6-story apartment buildings already exist in the sector. I don't think, go back. In harmony with the brick Victorian row houses that predominate. So in conclusion, I think the LeMay plan is very short-sighted and would be a serious mistake, and it needs a rethinking. And that is my considered opinion. Thank you.
We will now hear from Nick Luka on some planning issues.
Thank you, Julia, and thank you, everyone. Pleasure to be here. I'm going to tell you about onions, because that's a way in which we can think of planning in Montreal, the framework that we have. And what I want you to focus on here is that we have an outer skin, which is the Metropolitan Plan. And the reason we need to know about that is that the Metropolitan Plan, the PMAD, actually has density targets. And that's what's driving a lot of the content, in a sense, of the LeMay plan. They are saying we need to meet the density targets that the PMAD has laid out. I'm going to come back to that point in just a second. We have an agglomeration plan because the island of Montreal is considered an agglomeration of the city of Montreal and then the independent municipalities such as Westmount. We have a third layer, and we're getting into the sweeter, nicer part of the onion here in the city of Westmount, where, whoops, we can stay on that slide. Thanks, no worries. We've got a statutory general plan, and I'm going to underline that. I'm teaching you some jargon today. That's the only legally binding plan in the sense of plans that are required in the division of powers in Canada. And then the PPU, that is the special embellishment, it's kind of like a fancy hat or a nice pair of glasses you might put on to complete an outfit, is what the city of Westmount is doing for this sector here. My point here is that the onion is very big, has many layers, but when we cook, we slice open the onion, we often get rid of the outer layers. The top layer, the PMAD with its density targets, is an aspirational plan. It is not binding. And in fact, the density targets that LeMay has actually laid out in their plan are in the new proposed PMAD, which is in public hearings. So it's kind of an obeying in advance strategy or plan to something that is not legally binding. And that is something we need to keep in mind because we can then get into a more substantive discussion of what's appropriate for this place, both in terms of form and in terms of content, as Annmarie so eloquently, I think, introduced. So if we go to the next slide, on the left-hand side is an excerpt from the Metropolitan Plan, and everything that is in red or orange is a metro station or a REM station, and these are areas that have been designated as super densification areas. And the idea here is one that's familiar, it's become very widespread in planning around the world. It's that where we have high order public transport, we should put lots of housing and lots of jobs, which makes good sense. But that's in many ways how Westmount was organized right from day one. And the idea of super densification is something that can be useful, but densification is not like, we shouldn't think of it as going to a restaurant in Nova Scotia where they give you 12 kilograms of French fries and say that's a good value meal. More is not better when it comes to densification. It's just that we have to have enough. And that's why these legal and advisory documents have density thresholds. We'd like to hit a threshold and go, we don't have to go any further. The image is on the right. That's the block I live in. It's in Victoria Village. I chose to live there because it reminds me, both in experiential terms and in terms of its architecture, its morphology, of Berlin, where I've lived. Because it's very high density. The image that's in yellow, the drawing, the architectural drawing by Cardinal Hardy, is actually a study of a typical block in the plateau where we have very, very high densities, but we don't have tall, tall buildings. And that is true as well in the Victoria Village block that I'm showing here. So just as Annmarie mentioned, there are 6-story walk-ups in the area around in Sodo. We have these throughout, especially lower Westmount, and they are what constitute really remarkably high densities, and that's why we have good public transport, that's why we have lots of shops and services, that's why lots of us walk and ride bikes and do all that good stuff. If we go to the next slide, this is the area in question. We're looking at it sort of from the northeast. Thank you, Julia, that's wonderful. And I just want to sort of underline that there's a density threshold target of 480 units, dwelling units per hectare. Okay, that's the minimum that they would like, the PMAD would like to see being built in areas that are considered the hypercenter, which is to say downtown Montreal, of which the Atwater metro station is the western sort of extremity. The point I'm making in this slide is that we should look at everything that's in this picture. Whoops, we're jumping ahead, that's okay. We should look at everything in this picture because density, from the studies that are done on how people enjoy living in high density environments, it should be measured in quantitative terms at the neighborhood scale, not at the site scale. And I've thrown in a couple of numbers on this slide just to show you how many dwellings we already have. And I'm not going to go into the details, but we're already pretty much at that 500 number. We don't need more to satisfy a plan that hasn't even been approved, nor which is legally binding. And so there is legitimacy to focusing on what makes sense in terms of experiential qualities, in terms of visual and aesthetic qualities, and so on. So the final point I want to make here, we can proceed to the next slide. Image on the top is the same density expressed in 3 different architectural forms. It's not how dense you make it, it's how you make it dense. One of the beauties of Montreal in general is that we have very high densities without high-rise built form, and I think Westmount is an exemplar of that historic morphology that we've continued. So I'm part of a lot of networks of research. You can see a piece that I've published on the right with a Swedish and a Belgian colleague, where we're questioning the fact that local and regional governments around the world are forcing high densities onto sites in very Cartesian terms. They're drawing 2-dimensional plans and saying, we could put lots of density around this metro station. We need to focus on what is actually being extruded, the kind of environment, the kind of neighborhood, what people like, what people might want to see. And that includes the fact that Westmount hosts people at all different phases of life, because you can be young, you can be old, you can have children, you can live without children, you can choose to live in a taller building, you can choose to live in a triplex, you can choose to live in a detached house. Obviously, it depends on what your price point is, and so on. But that mixity is really important. And what we want to avoid is too much of this tower-based densification, which, for the record, is very much being used and driven by speculation and short-term rentals. A lot of what's been built in the last 10 years or so in central Montreal is hardly accommodating local needs. So those are the 3 points. It's not how dense we make it. The onion can be chopped and we can get rid of the outer skin. And we really need to think about what we want in terms of content and experiential qualities when we're working with this kind of a project and a future planning. Thank you.
A lot of brain. No, it's okay. It's fine. I'm linked up to this thing. So now we're just going to switch gears and start looking on a more granular level. We're going to talk a little bit about St. Catherine Street. This is a map that is turned so that the north is at the bottom of the screen. And I want you to just be looking at this row of this St. Catherine Street. And so the arrows are pointing you to be looking at St. Catherine Street as if you were standing with a Lexus neon to your back and looking at the streetscape. And here indeed is a streetscape that I ended up being responsible for in 2015 when the city was concerned about the historic building inventory on St. Catherine Street between Atwater and Green. And you can see all of the buildings are laid out to scale on this site plan. These are the buildings that are of heritage value. Some of them you will recognize, some are in deteriorated form. In fact, the Packard building, there's an agreement that the city, with the owner, that the owner will put back all the pieces that he took off that are being stored in his building. And so the ruinous condition that we see today is, I understand, part of an agreement that will one day lead to its restoration. But these are Category 1 and Category 2 buildings, and as all of you probably know, Category 1 buildings are to be kept in perpetuity. These buildings are to be maintained and restored to the highest standards. Category 2 buildings should be preserved. So let's just see what's going to happen. Here's the streetscape as LeMay has designed it for this part of St. Catherine Street. Design is the wrong word. Given you an image for it. And this is the image that they have given you as you look at it in elevation. More or less, I mean, the drawings, this is essentially correct, 30 and 20-story buildings to scale. And you can see that aside from the fact that these buildings are going to rise pretty well straight from the street, or not pretty well, they will rise straight from the street. One of the things that I think an urban planner or an architect would be looking at with this streetscape revealed is the stress and pressure that it will be putting on the buildings further to the west, and Nick may address that further as we get a little bit later into the discussion and and parts of the presentation again. So you can see that this not only gives you a glimmer of what that eastern edge of St. Catherine Street will be as it faces the Lexus Neon, but it also gives you an intuition that there could be further pressure on these on the rest of the streetscape as it moves towards Green Avenue. So if we look for a precedent for what we've just seen in these black elevations, I think that what we see at Children's Square is pretty well it. These are 23 to 29 story buildings, and I believe LeMay had a role in one of these buildings. And if you just look at the way in which the towers move off the podium, you can see that they move straight up. There is no setback, and indeed the lot sizes on that part of St. Catherine Street are so narrow that they will preclude any real setbacks of any value. And now I'm going to turn the mic over to Bob Cohen, who will be talking to us about a changing landscape that we are all living in real time.
Thank you, Julia. I'm a longtime resident of Westmount. From when I was a child, I lived in the Eastern Townships. I would come in every weekend and stay with my grandparents at 10 Rosemount Avenue, which is one of the first apartment buildings in Westmount. And when I came back to university, I lived in Westmount. And to my surprise, I live on the other side of the park as I grow older. So we raised our daughter she went to St. George's, a Westmount school, so we're very much tied up in this community. I must say my passions have been about housing have go back a long time as I was introduced, and I spent many years doing that. There are literally 10,000 units of housing between here and overseas that I've in some way or other been involved with. Which brings me to my point. The LeMay report was done at a different time. The LeMay report was done after the Children's. It was done during the period of the housing boom in Montreal. The LeMay report was, should I repeat all this? Did you hear me? Sorry. I have a long time, I won't go back all of it, but I have a long time in affordable housing, going back some 50 years now. And I bring that to bear now with a passion, okay? I didn't realize until I attended the last conference call from the Atwater Library just before everyone submitted 450 comments to the city. It was the day before. The mobilization in this community is really incredible in terms of what people want to see done. And getting to the LeMay report was done at a very different time. The housing boom, when you look back over the last 20, 25 years in this city of Montreal, I don't recognize the skyline anymore. The high rises that have happened as you go down to Griffintown, as you go along St. Catherine Street, 60 stories seems to be, the plausible financial arrangements, okay, with Quartier des Spectacles, if you look at also Phillips Square. But the Trump regime, it's no longer there anymore. And anyway, the housing boom has started to lapse, okay, before even Trump came in. But if you think it was bad then, or relapsing, or slowing down then, it's with Trump there, it's a whole new game, okay? With the tariffs that are coming in, with inflation that's going to happen, the Canadian economy. We have a prime minister who is an economist. He's a world-class economist. He came in, he came in on election night when he was elected. He said, build, baby, build, okay? Because he understands that in order to resolve the issue of the housing crisis, creating workers to build it is one of the mechanisms they have, and he's put in $12 billion on their budget. We'll see what his budget comes up with now. But there's a major concern in terms of this country. Housing crisis is at the top of the list. That being said, with the LeMay plan doesn't apply, and currently all the discussions and the presentations are based on high rises that won't happen. There's no way that financial institutions are going to fund 30-story towers. They're just not going to do it anymore. The financial institutions now are working out the fact that there is no demand for everything that was happening. We know that the statistics aren't out there, but all the high-rise, including Children's, but the Quartier des Specs downtown, and Phillips Square, they're all trying to rent now. They're not selling condominiums. They can't. There's no market for that. The interest rates are too high, and people can't afford it. The kids who were buying before, they can't buy anymore. Okay, they're going to rent, which makes it more and more unaffordable because they're paying higher rents, but they're taking up the supply that's there. So in pure economic terms, the situation with Trump only worsens the situation, and we're into a 10-year change of our economy. Okay, wait until the first budgets come out, and you know, Carney understands all this stuff. Okay, and he's going to lead the way in terms of having one economy instead of 13 economies. All the stuff that can be done within the country. Well, but if you look at the dilemma now with council, is that council is saying, well, maybe if we had had higher density, they would have bought. And the reason why they haven't gone into the rundown area along St. Catherine Street is because the zoning was too long. Okay, but it's almost perverse. Okay, it's the reverse that's happening. It's going to be a gift if you say you can build 30 stories. All of a sudden, the value of their land increases. Okay, and they do one of two things: they sell that value because no one's going to finance it to build for it, or they're going to wait 10 years. It's not going to happen. Okay, but the city of Westmount will have given them an increased value because instead of 10 stories, it's going to be 30 stories. So the economics of it doesn't work. Okay, and I think it's incumbent on the city of Westmount, if they're going to do that way, they're going to go that way. They should have serious economic people who it's not LeMay, they're not economists, to look at what it means to the city. At the present time, the banks don't say what the issues are. They're going to write it off. The FTQ, which is one of the funders, the trade organization, they don't reveal it. But yesterday in the Global Mail, there's a story about RioCan Real Estate Investment Trust. Okay, it's on the front page and on my website. There's a major story there. Look it up. RioCan, RIOCAN, Real Estate Investment Trust. They, and I'll give you the exact numbers. RioCan in 2015 financed. It's okay. RioCan in 2015 financed 15 Hudson Bay company properties across the country. Interesting enough, the front page of the Global Mail was Hudson Bay downtown Montreal. Okay, yesterday. In that process, they wrote down from something like 240 million to something like 50 million. They wrote it off, and they had to do it because it's a real estate investment trust and it has to be public. The others, the banks don't have to be public like that. They write it off. Same thing in the case of Dépôt Placement. They write it off, but you don't know what's happening behind the lines. I suggest that there's serious issues that they have to work out, and they will work it out. And Carney understands this. They will have the latitude in order to work it out. But my point is that if council gives a 30-story, a 20-story zoning to these people, they will then be able to sit on it and wait for it to happen because they can't finance it now, or they'll just sell it off. There'll be nothing built there. It'll be just as run down as it is now. Which brings me, okay, that's St. Catherine Street. Okay, fine.
So now we're just going to give you a few images of St. Catherine Street. Forgive me for this ridiculous conceit in the next, yes, boing boing here. Because I wanted to draw your attention to it, and I have no means of putting arrows on the screen as we do when we teach, so we're just, the boing boing is there to make you pay attention to it. The formula for success for St. Catherine Street will, following exactly what Bob just said, will not correlate to height, but to other initiatives. Here are two examples that we know well from retail in Westmount, and one in Sweden, in which you can see through the act of just putting in a few small tables, you create space, you create public space, and you create community. But there's a number of things that you also need to ensure before you get this level of success. The first and the greatest, of course, is sun. And now when you look at these pictures again, particularly of Green and Victoria Village, you start to see the sunlight playing across the buildings or hitting the street. And now think back to the height on St. Catherine Street as is proposed. You will understand that that whole part of St. Catherine Street will not see the sun shine again. So that's a bit of a problem. That's a problem, not a bit of a problem, that's a problem. Here are a few other problems. One is that Alexis Neon Plaza is completely blind for almost its entire length along St. Catherine Street. By blind, I mean there are no entrances, there's no in and out, there's no, there are very few. It's impenetrable. You can only go in through the one door that is there, the one door that is on St. Catherine's, on Atwater, and then there are a couple of doors on de Maisonneuve. But in effect, it doesn't provide you with a lively streetscape, as does the rest of Green Avenue. So that's a problem. That problem is amplified by something that lies outside the boundaries of Westmount, but being good neighbors, we should all be thinking about it, which is the Forum, which also represents a completely impenetrable streetscape, so that for quite a lot of the blocks that people would be walking connectively from Montreal's further east into Westmount, you're passing by areas that are not very friendly to the stroller or the shopper. And then finally, the other problem is that you must ensure, as they did not on Mayor Street in Montreal, and this is a view of Mayor Street, you cannot have garage doors and delivery trucks constantly on the front of the building, blocking pedestrian access and blocking the kind of activity that you see in the Swedish slide. Those are all issues. And when we start to look at the block of St. Catherine Street, you will notice when your eye compares it, you see that little restaurant icon that I couldn't actually get off the screen. That building is about 100 feet long. The buildings that you see at Children's Square are 200 feet long. So they're very stumpy. That's one of the reasons I said to you that you can't have a setback, because if you actually set back, there'd be nothing to build along St. Catherine Street. But the other real problem is, that the lane is terribly skinny. So when I say to you, and I speak, I believe my fellow travelers here agree completely, that you cannot have a street life when you have garage doors constantly on the street. That means they're going to be on the lane. This is not a lane that you can do that on. So that represents another problem, and you can imagine how difficult it will be when there are this many high buildings with that degree of population all using this one tiny little lane. The next issue that we're coming to is the question about community assets, and we're just going to give you an example of a couple of them. One is that when you have investor assets, as you do in Children's Square, they have co-opted, if you will allow me to use that word, Cabot Square as their forecourt. And in the LeMay plan, in effect, along Dorchester, that is exactly what will happen as well. If the plan goes ahead, this grouping of buildings around this new proposed square will mean that all of these buildings are now using the square as its forecourt, not as a public space, but as a way for the developers, in effect, to sell those units at greater price because they are looking down on a public square. So that is a difference between an investor asset and using a square or a green space for a community asset perhaps some people look puzzled. We'll get to that, and we'll perhaps clarify that in the question period. We have another great community asset here, and we must really thank Lynn Verge and Helen Malkin and Carol for all of their work in putting this opportunity together. So we're a demonstration of what this slide is showing us. We're a demonstration of how important this building is as a community asset to our community. And it just gives you a panoply here of some of the activities that happen and the age groups that happen here. This is open to all, and it provides a variety of experiences aside from its absolutely marvelous interior. But one of the problems with the LeMay plan is that it doesn't take into account the value of the Atwater Library. There's been a lot of discussion in the press about putting a very tall building beside the Atwater Library and all the potential negatives about that along St. Catherine Street in Atwater. But the other issue is that the Atwater Library becomes marginalized. Instead of it being marginalized, we would suggest that a future plan really has to capitalize on this marvelous asset and make it into part of a civic anchor for the neighborhood. And so we've circled Atwater, and we've circled the empty lot at the corner of Gladstone and Dorchester, and saying, if you're going to have a community, a civic building as part of this area, then put it perhaps where we have shown you the other yellow circle. Make Tupper not into this back door, but into this wonderful walking street connecting these two civic spaces, so that the Atwater Library not only continues its function, but it grows in its function. And it will be linked to whatever this building is, whether it's a pool or it's another smaller community area. People will be walking from one to another along Tupper. Tupper will have a change in its vocation. Okay, that's a little bit odd. I hit the screen too hard and it's crawling out. The other aspect that we wanted to talk about, and I'm pretty sure this will come up again and again, and maybe Nick would like to say a few words about this, which is a plan that we feel is important that will welcome all generations and families. High-rise buildings, as you will probably understand from intuition and also from reading perhaps the articles that have recently appeared in Canadian papers, where they're saying, you know, gosh darn it, we have to start designing now for the end users, the people who are going to be in these buildings, not for the investors, because the investors have dried up. But the interesting thing is, generally speaking, in these 600 square foot apartments, you can indeed conceive children, but you very rarely bring them up. And now Nick will say something to that. Not to that particular.
I don't know what I can say to follow that one up. That was a zinger, Julia, but fantastic, terrific. I will just say that it's one of the things that we've been really looking at, the work that I've done with my colleagues in Europe, is that if we're going to, Sweden is well known. People in Quebec say, what do they do in Sweden to have such high fertility rates? It's not putting them into 600 square foot apartments, I can tell you that. But it's that grade-related housing is really important. And grade-related is a term that we use. It's exactly the sort of thing that we see on the images here that all of my colleagues have talked about. It's when you can have eyes on the street, the parents can see the kids can start to expand what's called their home range. They play right close to the dwelling for the first couple of years, but then they start going a little bit farther afield. They start to build up a little bit of independence. I did work with the Ville Centre about 15 years ago, the city of Montreal, when they were trying to figure out how to create urban housing that was suitable for families with children. And basically what that project involved is going back to what we have had for 150 years in Montreal, the Plex fabrics, high density but not high rise, lots of housing, lots of good public spaces, lots of people-friendly, human-scaled, eyes on the street kind of neighborhood spaces. And in fact, one of the images that I talked about with the study of the block in the plateau was from a study that the city commissioned on how can we learn from the successes of the past. And the main recommendations and the incentive programs that were set up there by the city of Montreal were to find ways to get developers to take the leap and focus on building 5, 6, maybe 7, 8-story buildings. And we see a number of examples of new projects that have been done in the western end of Griffintown that are successful in that respect. So if we're talking about multi-generational and neighborhoods and cities for everyone, we have to remember that what we have in our base fabric in Montreal and in Westmount has proven its worth over decades and over generations. So I know there's a little bit of buzz. We can see it even, well, you can see the counter argument in the headline that's called out on this slide here. Millennials love living in tall buildings. That was the same argument that was being made in the 60s and the 70s when Place de la Cité was being built, Cité Concordia, and so on. People don't want to live in plexes or houses anymore. They want to live in tall buildings. And then suddenly those young people grew up and wanted to live in places where they could see their kids playing on the street and have a bit of a relationship. So the bottom line on that point is we know from history and from having made a lot of mistakes, I think, in planning and urban design, that it's the sort of 3 to 6 story built form that is what is important if we're going to be really welcoming families. And that includes housing that is affordable for households with children, which is a big part of the housing crisis we're facing right now.
So we're just going to look at our last community asset that we're going to identify tonight, which is land. And in fact, right here you see that there are 2 lots that belong to the city. More than lots, they're considerable parcels of land. And they are here, and they contain about 5,600 square meters, or about 60,000 square feet of floor plate upon which housing could be built that would be controlled by the city. And we're going to ask Bob to now talk about affordability. This is just some examples of affordable housing across Canada. I broadened the slide from the one that we showed the city council and mayor to show Milton Park, Rosemont, Petit Patrie, the Pan Am Village, and an interesting housing project in Calgary called Prairie Sky. So, Bob, this gives us the definition for those of you who are wondering what affordable housing is about. This is a definition that's a bit of a funny negative. If you are spending more than 30% of your gross income on your housing, then you too need affordable housing. In effect, many of us in this room would say, oh, I need affordable housing, because there you go. And so Bob is going to talk about the different strategies and our unique opportunity that in part is waiting there because of the land that is owned by the city, and the position has not been taken by council as of Monday for anything about affordable housing.
I'm going to leave St. Catherine Street and go to Dorchester. St. Catherine is very complex, several different owners, and who knows, as I said earlier, who knows what they're going to do with that. My suspicion is they're not going to be able to get financing, as I said. But Dorchester is another story. Dorchester, the land belongs to City Westmount. We don't have to worry about where to get the land. So it's a real opportunity. And it's a real opportunity to build affordable housing. At scale, okay, as Nick and all 4 of us have been saying, at scale, which is not high rises, but to build accessible, affordable housing, good quality for families and multi-generation. And I was speaking with Nick earlier. Yeah, there's something like a potential for 800 to 1,000 units on that site. I'm inviting people, as a follow-up to this, is that we get together and talk about what can be done with that. And anyone who's interested in that they can sign up in the back, and we can have an ongoing discussion about it. The problem with the consultation up to now is that I think that process hasn't been followed. So it's trying to do a process from the bottom up and working together and coming up with a proposal for council. There are people in this room that I know very well, have long experience in that, and we can put our heads together in relation to that in a way that does it in a timely fashion. We're talking three to 7 stories buildings, but again, there's nothing that I'm saying now we have to talk about it together and come up with solutions. But it's a lower scale. The reknitting with the south and the north. We're talking about affordable housing. I'm sure it was much more affordable in those days when they demolished the north than it is today. Well, but we can put in place affordable housing, rental or ownership, which is sustainable on forever. Okay, whoever is living there, which is coming out of the process now, where you say, what do you do with housing? We can be very innovative in that, in doing that. Partnerships, the city, the federal government, the provincial government, they can get their heads together and work together on it. The city has issues with infrastructure. There are infrastructure programs in the federal government. And we know that the new government on the federal side is talking seriously of putting in affordable housing across the country. And you can see that there's something like, I did a quick calculation, and there's a potential for 7,000 units a year in Quebec for the next 5 years. It's an enormous kind of possibility where somehow or other, the right project, the right people, the way it's done, the mobilization that's happened, all this counts in terms of bringing it forward. And it's on land that's already there. We could start building, if we got the green light from council, we could start building there within 2 years after all the planning. So this is an invitation to everyone in this room to participate in that. And if you sign up, we can talk about it more. There's a lot of detail in relation to that on all kinds of issues. And we can bring in people that will be able to, like the people around this table, because they can talk to those issues with you. So think about that seriously. We're talking about non-market housing, okay? Market housing, the rents, we know the rents are, and the more, and because of the demand and everything, it goes up, it can be quite high and really not affordable. We're talking about non-market housing. Non-market housing, you do it on a non-profit basis. You do it with cooperatives, you do it with agencies that specialize in that non-profit. I'm not talking about public housing. I'm talking about non-profit social agencies, social housing agencies, as well as cooperative housing agencies. There's like 30,000 units in the city that have been built that way over the last generation. So the know-how is there, but we can learn from that. Non-market housing means that you don't increase the rents in order to get a return on your income. You keep the rent, you increase the rents in order to meet your expenses, whether it's the taxes, whether it's the maintenance, whether it's the management of the properties. But it's only the expenses. You're not driven by profit at the other end. And you don't sell the properties every 10 or 15 years, okay, in order to get a profit out of it. So you create a structure which is long-term affordability to house the people who are in need of it and want affordable housing. And you create budgets so that you can keep the repairs in good repair after 5, 10, 15 years, as you have to do that as well. But we can, I'll share that with you as well, if you're so inclined. My last thought is we're building communities. We've already said that. And I repeat, the Atwater Library, what an amazing organization it is. And soon to celebrate 200 years. Can you imagine this? 200 years this institution has been here in over almost 100 years in this very building. They've just renovated it because they figured out how to do that. And look at the passion that has been created because of the Atwater Library around this very issue. Okay, all the people here were mobilized. I don't know how many people are online. But the last time in August, in January, there were 400 people that the next day sent comments to the council. People on council are listening. I hope that they understand the risks in terms of what's happening. Like you're going to give a gift to people that won't have the means to develop it, and we're ready to develop affordable housing now. So I hope that everyone around this table, but also at council, understands the opportunity. That's the legacy of this council, to be able to do it the right way, to move away from where it was done in the past, because it doesn't work anymore, okay, and to come up with affordable housing for people, families, older people, and community spaces as well, and do it well.
The last couple of slides are really just to show you that we already have 6, 7-story buildings in Westmount. You don't even notice them. They're all around you. They have encircled us. They are all around you, and you are living comfortably with them, and you can live with them in the southeast sector easily. There are multiple types of housing. They can take all kinds of architectural resolutions. So there is no one cookie cutter type. It can be many different things. But we wanted to end on this slide that Phyllis brought to the conversation originally, which is that Westmount has an enormous greenery that starts at Westmount Mountain and descends through the whole of the city until it gets, unfortunately, to this little area that we're now consumed with, where you can see that it changes from an interspersing of gray and green to entirely gray. And so what we are hoping for is to introduce throughout this area, in the same way that the rest of Westmount is, this idea of pervasive, verdant environment that is just like the rest of Westmount. And so the rest of Westmount is defined not by grand gestures, but mostly by streets with trees and lawns that are modest, usually in size, and individuals who are planting their flowers and providing us with a very green environment. So our vision, for some reason, the top of the screen here has suddenly been taken over. Okay, vision. Reknit the urban fabric, which will create community. Annmarie has spoken very eloquently about that. Welcome all generations by providing a diversity of choices in the housing stock. Ensure affordability. Plan for families. Rebuild our population. Reinforce livability. You want to be able to walk, shop, be safe, play, and be in community in this one area. It will be possible to reknit it back to now what we will all be calling SoDo and the rest of the city. Catchy. Yeah, it's catchy. Regreen, continue the mountain into the sector. So in summary, I can say this, but really any one of us can say it, because I think we've all been focusing on one aspect or another of this. Density is not the issue. Westmount has already met its obligations. We do not have to be high-rise to meet any requirements. Nick nods. The plan should reflect Westmount's character, not Montreal's downtown core. There is a unique opportunity to build affordable housing on city-owned land, and the legacy of this council will rest on putting this important project on a sound track, not on meeting an artificial deadline of August 2025 to put this plan in place when there are a lot of people who are very, very uneasy about it and strongly negatively disposed towards it. So what are the next steps? What are our call to arms that we are asking from you? This is really a unique opportunity for Westmount to recreate community and be innovative in its approach to the sector. Be far looking, not be mired in what was happening 5 years ago, but be seeing the landscape as it is changing and be innovative. Share your thoughts with your friends and your neighbors to let them understand the potential of the sector and what it means to Westmount as a whole. I now live on de Maisonneuve near Westmount Park, but I actually lived on Dorchester, I lived on Bruce, and I lived on Stainer. So I've been around too, and I can tell you I feel very concerned about this area. Join the discussion on making affordable housing happen, and Bob has said that he will stay at the end of the meeting and get a sign-up sheet so that people can start to discuss this together. Speak to your elected officials and voice your opinion. The election is coming in November. And finally, as we said before, the legacy of this council should be to do something that will be wonderful and innovative, not to do something that's now an old model that is, as Bob and Nick have suggested, will not be having money poured in to make it happen, will help land speculators, but will not help our community. Thank you very much. And now we have questions.
Thank you for a superb presentation. It's really heartening to have 4 experts sharing their concern, their critique of the LeMay proposal, and presentation of alternatives. It's really heartening. Now, for the Q&A, I'm going to begin by asking our IT manager to end the slideshow on the screen so that the Zoom audience can see the 4 panelists' big screen. The Atwater Library has recorded the presentation, and within the next day it will be posted on our YouTube channel for everyone with internet to see. Now, for the Q&A, we all have to use a mic, and we only own 4 mics. So I'm going to alternate between the in-person audience and the Zoom audience. I'll depend on the Atwater Library staff to alert me to any Zoom chat questions. So in the in-person audience, I see Karen Marks, former mayor of Westmount, and Karen, you'll have to use the mic.
Thank you very much. It's hard to know what to pick to say. First of all, I want to say how lucky we are to have 4 residents who are with so much expertise. And I guess I'm a little disappointed that we didn't start this whole process with you, because I think you are not only very experienced and capable, but very sensitive to the community, and that maybe would have made this whole process a little more effective if it had started in that place. However, that's not the case. And I did want to say that often we keep hearing, well, but we have to do something about St. Catherine Street. And I think one thing that wasn't so much mentioned is that St. Catherine Street is a disaster in terms of the street, the streetscape. So I think that it might require, even though it's an investment from the city. If they want to get people to invest, why would somebody build on a street that looks like a third world area? When you look at Green Avenue, we have a very nice building that was built above Saint-Saison because Green Avenue was a place that people would want to live. So I think that's one thing that the city could be looking at if they want to develop it. I think a second thing is that the LeMay plan is not only not a good one, but this really is our last opportunity for land that is available. And it's our last opportunity to do something spectacular and meaningful and that will add to and grow our community. So I think it has to be looked at not only as we don't like LeMay, but here's a chance. And let's not waste this chance, because it really is the last one we will have. We don't have any other land. And then I think the last thing would be that, and it was mentioned by Julia, that we fought very hard to keep Westmount and to keep it as its own community. And I think to even talk about making us look more like downtown is to negate a fight that all of our community fought very hard for. We are a unique community. We have a special feeling. And when you cross Atwater, you should be able to say, we've come to this special place. What a lovely kind of respite it is from downtown to cross the street and get into this wonderful community with the green spaces and the low density. So I think that those are all very important factors. The last one is, and I've left copies of it, we were designated as a National Historic Site in Canada in 2011, and we were designated because of our careful zoning, because of our heritage, because of all of the things that has made Westmount Westmount. And I think it would be very unfortunate to use this last piece of land to take away the reasons why we were designated in the first place, or to besmirch them in some way.
Thank you. On the table at the back are copies of Karen's document about Westmount being named a National Historic Site. Also, there's a clipboard with Bob Cohen's sign-up sheet. Lavina will be glad to show it to you. More hands up. Okay, Lavina is coming with the mic. You'll have to speak right into the mic.
Oh, sorry. My name is Patricia Forbes, and I just give you a bit of background. I worked for 43 years at the Montreal Children's Hospital, so I saw what happened to that site. I think the development of that site has been a disaster and continues to be controversial. As you may know, there's still a lawsuit going on about the 6th tower that's going to be built there between the City of Montreal and the developer. So I was so pleased to hear your presentation today, because I had written to Westmount stating that I thought the right solution was to build lower density, like 5 or 6 story buildings, especially along St. Catherine Street, actually. And the tower was not a good idea at all. I think towers are probably on their way out.
Would anyone like to comment? And a panelist, I mean. I see some lovely comments on the Zoom chat. Panelists, I'm going to email you the entire transcript of the Zoom chat later. I don't yet see a question. Is there another hand up in the auditorium? Yes, more hands. Lavina.
John Breslow, Grosvenor Avenue. This is a question actually for Robert, but before I get there, Karen's remarks are actually very true, but in an ecological component also. That is, when you have an edge where the ocean hits the land, where forest hits field, that's where you get the most productivity. That's where it's most interesting. To have the children's development 30, 40 stories on one side, you need the edge there for both sides. That's the first. The question is to Robert, as an alumni of Pax Mill, I remember how some of it worked, but I need your expertise. When that was done, one of the things that happened is we got 2% mortgage rate, when back in 1970s, the going mortgage rate was 18%. If you're old like I am, you'll remember that. It only works, as you pointed out, for non-market housing anywhere. Otherwise, the price goes up, clearly. If I remember correctly, and that's where I need your help, the non-market component worked because the federal government went and stepped in, and this is my memory, you probably have a better one, to make that possible. My understanding, talking to City Council, was that the city-owned property was valuable, and Conrad definitely talked about having large towers as a source of revenue. So that concept stands at odds totally with the idea of sustainable low-cost housing. How does this work where the city owns the land and shows, as Julia asked, no interest whatsoever in low-cost housing?
Okay, thank you. Bob, oh, you have a mic. Great.
Thanks for the question. Well, you go back a long way. I think you also fought for Paxmill and Milton Park, as I understand it. And life takes its course. Here we are together in Westmount. That being said, you're asking. I'll be fairly open on it. The reason why Milton Park happens is because the local community fought for it. Okay, there's no doubt about it. Okay, led by 2 or 3 people. Luka Koala comes to mind first of all. I know Phyllis will agree with me on that. And it comes because of friendship between Phyllis and Lucia. Okay, they fought together. They met each other because they were in Heritage Montreal. They were looking at buildings that were being torn down by the Dropo administration, and they came together. And somewhere, Lucia says to Phyllis, "I think I have something to show you." And Lucia was organizing street demonstrations on Jeanne Mance because they wanted to have a highway going all the way up Park Avenue. Okay, and the people were out on the street. Okay. And when La Cité came along, and La Cité came along, and people were demonstrating because they were going to demolish their buildings. There were 50 people who went to jail that night. Okay, I think all the choppers, these things happen, but the mobilization of the community. I make that analogy with here. Okay, this room and what I sensed in the previous call. Okay, at the beginning of January, this community is very mobilized and very concerned that the right thing be done in relation to the whole southeast sector, okay, from St. Catherine to Dorchester and everything in between. So I put that analogy with the two together, okay? And the other story is Phyllis knew how to get things done politically, okay? And 2 weeks before the referendum, they had a choice. There'd be a demonstration on the street. There'd be a demonstration on the street, okay, against what the federal government is doing. And the federal government had to do something. Someone very close to Phyllis met with us at the regional office at 11 o'clock. He came out of it, he said, "This is really crazy." He called the Prime Minister's office, and at 6 o'clock, the Vice President of CMHC was in her office saying, "You have everything you want." Okay? Somewhere, council is very accessible to many people in this room. They're online, they're in this room. I would say you match the mobilization of this community with what council's decision has to be and their legacy. I understand when they say we want to be able to have, when you enter Westmount, we want people to realize it's a unique city. It's not high rises like the Childs Ordinance, and people have articulated this, okay? But that's where the choosing LeMay to do it, it's almost inevitable that that's the result of it, okay? But it's another economy, and it doesn't fit in any way to Westmount. Green Avenue, I love Green Avenue. I love the Westmount Village. That's the kind of status we want and the quality of life that everyone enjoys. Okay, there's no reason why we can't do that. Someone around this room, perhaps listening, said, "I told my adolescent sons, you don't go down to St. Catherine Street. It's forbidden to do it, okay, because it's too dangerous for her kids." So it's like that, eh? So the answer is, Milton Park's a good example because it mobilized and got it done. There were 600 units and over 135 buildings, a mix of income from seniors to young families who all raised their families now, okay, and people in rooming houses, because that was what it was. They had been transported into rooming houses to get as much revenue as you wanted. But we saved those rooming houses, and they'll be there forever, okay? So you can do that also with St. Catherine and with Dorchester, and on city-owned land. That's a good start. Where will the money come from? The 2%. That's true. By reducing in those days, the interest rates were 18%. You're right, John. But by reducing it to 2%, with a bit of subsidy from the city and the province, because the city didn't want to do anything about rooming houses, so we went to the province said sure. But in the current context now, Mark Carney has said He's putting in $12 billion. His party said they're putting in $12 billion. That's a start. They've been absent they've been absent since the 90s. It's a start, okay? But you're not going to rebuild what you have failed to do. And with the economy now, there's going to be more homeless people. You think it's bad now, it's going to get worse. There's going to be people who can't afford. What do you do with that? That's what we're going into now. But you have to start somewhere. And it looks like the government now in the federal level, and the province has been there since the 90s anyway. So by matching their funds, and the city coming in some way or other and at least making the land available, and they can, the cities don't have the money to do this either. So it's got to be from those two levels of government. But that's where it goes. The analogy is the federal government came in largely the last time, but they've been absent literally since the 90s, unfortunately. But here we go. It's a generation before this is all going to get started. But Westmount can do it in 2 years. Start construction in 2 years with the right decision.
Thank you, Bob. There's a question from Karen in the Zoom audience about who is responsible for deciding the height restrictions and approving new construction projects. Who is it we all need to try to influence?
I'll just take us back to my onion analogy. It's the city of Westmount. Westmount is the one that has the legal powers and has the plan and the zoning regulations. Westmount will ultimately issue the building permits, and Westmount is not beholden to what is being laid out as an ideal situation in the metropolitan plan. So it's to the local councillors and to the mayor that comments should be addressed.
Thanks, Nick. So we have time for 2 more questions. Carol Christie Olson first.
Hi, I want to thank you all for bringing such expertise. One of the things I want to clarify is that we've been talking, several members of the audience have talked low density. And what I want to clarify is we're not talking low density. We're talking about low rise. And there's a big difference. So we have to be mindful of how we speak about this topic, because we're not talking about low density. We're for density. It's just how it's being represented. And what I think we'd like to argue, and I think what, Nick, you brought to the table, is that density can be represented in many different ways. And I think what we're asking is a revisioning of that density to bring the heights down more in line with what is the character of Westmount. So I just wanted to clarify that point. Furthermore, I want to ask the panel, how do we really address the city's need for revenue? Because that is a real need. And we can't ignore that. And I think it's very important to address that need with the need to balance affordable housing and with the need of revitalizing this area in a relatively short timeline, because the way it is now is not sustainable. And if we look at the way it could potentially play out, it could be years. And so how do we shorten that timeline? How do we get together around the table to ensure that the city meets its revenue targets and that the community meets its targets for densification, beautification, revitalization?
Yes, okay. So at council on Monday, I believe it was Councillor Pert who said that some enormous amount, over 50% of any tax dollar that is captured in Westmount goes to the greater city. So we're looking at probably 49% or something like that. Of that, it's not just, guys, I find this idea of taxes being the revenue source astonishing, because it implies that there's nothing else on the other side of the balance sheet. But in fact, a city has to provide all sorts of services for those residents, all sorts of services, including civic things like libraries, aside from garbage and taxes, garbage and snow removal and everything else, all right? So it's not that this is a cash cow that's suddenly going to be milked very well. It is, residential does not pay enormously well into municipal coffers. What pays enormously well, I understand, and Nick will be able to say this on a broader sense, is commercial properties and industrial properties. I'll leave now Nick to answer the rest of this.
I don't know that I have much to add other than the big philosophical problem, which I think we're on the verge of addressing, which is that municipalities don't actually have sources of revenue. That's why they tend to pursue any opportunity that they have, and it's kind of like the Marie Celeste or the Franklin ships in the Northwest Territories. We're going to burn whatever we can to keep warm for another 5 minutes. So building 400 more units in these towers is not going to plug the hole in the tax revenue. We're in a moment, when I say we're on the verge of something, there's a very strong reorganization of who has power and responsibility and the ways in which money that is raised through various kinds of taxes are returned to end users and local neighborhoods. That's partly why we have the CMM, as Julia mentioned, but it's also why we have to focus on what we want for this area, because a few more residential units are not going to make the difference. The commercial and industrial property tax rates are a great deal higher, and many of you, I'm sure, have seen the sort of the winces and moans and groans of pain from merchants and other actors saying we're also feeling the squeeze. So we're in the midst, I think, of a significant fiscal discussion about a reorganization of fiscal responsibilities. And in the meantime, we should be focusing on what makes good sense in terms of this context for people who could live here, who do live here, people who come here to play. And I want to also thank you for underlining the point. Low rise is the key operator, higher density. And Montreal is wonderful as a city, and Westmount as an exemplar, as I said. Low rise, high density. And it's interesting to think about density as critical. We can reach critical density. It's enough. We've got plenty. And that's where we get good services and really livable kinds of neighborhoods. More doesn't then make it better. So we can focus on quality and character, architectural and experiential qualities.
Thank you. To close, I'm going to call on Theodora Samiotis and then leave the last word to Phyllis Lambert. Theodora.
Thanks. Oh, why am I coming up here? No, I can come here. It's fine. Oh, okay. On the Zoom. There we are. Okay. I just felt it was important, as the councillor who began this whole discussion on the redevelopment of the Southeast 10 years ago. Here we are. How's that? Okay. So over 10 years ago, I began, how's that? Am I good now? Thank you. Over 10 years ago, the city began a discussion about the Southeast. We began with upzoning St. Catherine, right? We got to the current zoning that we had. Karen, you're right. The city should have put forward a vision of St. Catherine Street. Then maybe we would have had some more buildings built on St. Catherine at the time, but we didn't. We went on to look at other elements of the Southeast, Dorchester, which became a very controversial discussion in terms of the width of the street and the height at the time. There was an McGill report which was brought through. Unfortunately, it was shelved because there was disagreement in terms of the amount of density. If you think that, this is super, super dense, back then it was not quite dense at all, and yet it was shut down and it was shelved. So I think if there is one thing to say to the council, to say thank you for bringing back the discussion of the Southeast, because that is a very essential part of our city that we need to take a look at. And as you mentioned, I think somebody mentioned, we need to resolve this. We can't continue to have that blight. Parking lots are the lowest form of urban planning that exists, and so we must move forward. But how to do this, I'm not going to, you've raised a lot of the points in terms of the things that have to be addressed. In terms of densification and the right type of densification. But ultimately, right now, I think we're at a point where council has had their last official, public meeting. And so what's coming next could potentially be that PPU. So I would just want to echo and add onto the call to action. It's not just about understanding the potential. I think a lot of people here have expressed the potential, particularly in terms of housing, which was not actually much on the table about 10 years ago when we began, but is very much front and center now of any kind of urban planning that you're doing as a city. But it's not just about the potential, but understanding what's at stake, because unfortunately in municipal politics, people don't take the time to listen and talk and look at what's going around them. And I still fear there's a lot of people that don't know that there's a PPU that's about to be signed off by this council before they leave. And I think there's still a lot of people that aren't aware of the discussions that have taken place. And so I would echo and ask everyone around here to have those discussions and reach out directly and formally to your elected councillor and the mayor if you are concerned about this, so that they have your opinion, even though many gave them online. And we do have to recognize there was an attempt by the current council, but all of which to say there's still more that we can do, and I urge you all to do that. Thank you.
This has been a brilliant discussion, and I think there's a very sympathetic audience here. Can you hear me? Okay, thank you. Okay, you have to do this way. But I think that you need to start with a project. And I think that the point that you can do something on those pieces of property would be absolutely the only way to do it. You need something to get things moving here. I was very much involved with Westmount Square. I was called in because I know, I know pretty well the work of Mick Svanderow, and I was called in to help make that a project that would work. It was the conversion of the office building into residential space. The problem with Westmount is the mayor had no vision. He had a vision at that point that he didn't want Westmount to be a dormitory city. I mean, that's such nonsense. And so you need an idea now. You need to know what you want this place to be. This place has been, as we showed, really ruined some time ago, and it's just necessary for leadership here, for all the people who've talked, and everybody who's in this room, to do something about it. It doesn't happen by itself. You know, it just doesn't happen by itself. And so if you can go to the federal government, get some of the money that Carney is having for whatever, for housing, find a way of doing it. Because whoever said that this project will never go ahead is so right. It's absolutely ridiculous now. There's nobody who wants to do it. Nobody. Who wants to? Who would come to Westmount to face Lexington Dion? You know, it just doesn't make sense. So please, all of you, get together and really send in petitions, send in everything you can, but use your energy, because that's the only way you can save the city. It will not happen by it's always people power. It's always people's power. For example, Milton Park. Sure, I could help in being able to do something about bringing stuff to the feds so that they could support the thing. But the point was that even before Lucia Kowalik was there was a whole huge community. They tore down half of Milton Park. A whole huge community that was against that, and who understood, what they understood was that city was for people to live in and for families to live in. And so they kept that always before. It is still a very strong community. But if Westmounters don't stand up for their own city, nothing will happen. So please just get on the ball, okay?
Well, what a powerful message to end with. Thank you, Phyllis, for that call to arms. Thank you, panelists, Julia, Annmarie, Nick, and Bob.